Town of Washington Historical Society meeting held on Thursday, May 17th at 7:30 p.m. at the Lyle Memorial Federated Church in Millbrook, New York. And the topic of tonight's discussion is the home front during World War II.
Brought on the subject of what we're doing tonight, Millbrook, the home front, maybe a year ago. And when the library gave us the old newspapers, that was really an incentive, because then he could sit down, turn page after page over 5 years, 300 pages a year, and find all kinds of things for me to photocopy, cut out and put up for us to look at tonight. There's a lot of reading there, which I knew you'd never get to read, but I couldn't cut off and just leave headlines because there's so many names in the content. And I'll probably end up making this into a scrapbook. Any of you have pictures, you couldn't get all the pictures of the soldiers, or interesting pictures that you would like to copy and put into that scrapbook. Now, the months before it's finished, please get in touch with me because I'd like to include everyone in that. Now, I was 10 years old in 1941. Came here to high school in 1945, and I do have some memories, not as many as many of you. Bill wasn't even in this area. He was in Bermuda. His father went there to build a airfield. He went there in 1941 and saw much more than we saw in 1941. I'll let him tell us about that. He came back to the States from Bermuda, went to college, and when he was 17, he then volunteered in the Navy. You may have noticed his Navy uniform out there. Then after medical school, he ended up in the Army for a number of years. So Bill, you get us started, and I hope everyone will join in as the evening goes on.
Well, 60-some years ago, a lot of young American men and women went off to save the world. And thank God they did. The things that were found in the death camps in Germany at the end of the war made it clear that had we not prevailed, it would have been a dreadful calamity to the world. We're here to talk tonight about World War II and Washington and Millbrook. I thank you for coming. I thank many of you who brought memorabilia and provided that to the meeting. We're here to recall a special time, special people who made history, and how the town responded to trade events in World War II. Remembering tells us something about who we are and what we can do when we must. I will ask for a show of hands of who remembers World War II. I'm going to talk more than you want tonight, but the whole idea is to have you jump in and you say something that seems interesting, you want to make some comment about it. I'm going to need your help tonight, because as Jimmy said, I wasn't here. Most of what I know about what happened here during the war is from the round table. And as she mentioned, I had a front row seat on the back of the Atlantic as a kid out in Bermuda. We had no practice blackouts. We had serious blackouts all the time. We had survivors of ship sinking put up in our house. We watched the convoys that went assembled to invade North Africa formed up on our doorstep. We saw battle-damaged ships. We saw the wounded coming back by air through the airfield of Bermuda. I was in the British version, so the things called ARP, and helped out the home guard side. And as Jimmy mentioned, I enlisted in the Navy when I was 17, in the late 1944, but only got out to the fleet when the war was effectively over, so I didn't really do much to shorten it. I'm, however, quite grateful to those people that chose to use the comic drama so they didn't have to participate in the invasion of Japan. Jimmy and I worked with the roundtable in high school yearbooks where World War II is very well reflected in those pages. But we need your help in bringing that experience to life. Our posters couldn't begin to capture all of the important things that went on around here. We know about that a lot. There is a kind of chronology on the couch out there below the map. I'll just give you a quick run through the war. The Chinese thought World War II began before 1939 for some reason. Officially, the war began in 1939. Germany ripped over Poland. 1940, the Germans overran West Europe very quickly with blitzkrieg. The U.S. started rearming and began the draft. Millbrook roundtable, we don't have posters for 39, 40, 46. Millbrook roundtable was full of letters from England, people who had Millbrook connections, talking about the bombing area. And there was a lot of activity in providing relief supplies for England called bundles for Britain. In 1941, most of that year we were not in the war. We were clearly getting ready for more trouble. Germany overran the Balkans and invaded Russia. The draft was extended by one vote, which perhaps disappointed the group elected I was surprised that the first aluminum drive took place before we got into the war. We started to build a lot of airplanes. December 7th is the day that many people remember when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. Millbrook was probably the safest small town in the United States that day. There were about 7,000 soldiers camped out at Thorndale on their way back to Massachusetts for maneuvers in the southern United States. 42 was a scary year. There were a lot of defeats. The Japanese swept over the Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia. Later that year, the U.S. and allies began some counterattacks, but it was still pretty tough going. Civilian production of almost everything stopped. No more automobile production, no more refrigerators, no more radios. Everything was converted to going to military production. At that time, wage and price control and rationing came into effect, I think probably for the first time in the United States. 43 was a year when the tide turned. Air war against Germany really heated up. Sicily and Italy were invaded, and comebacks began in the Pacific. 44 was the beginning of the end. Serious bombing of Japan began. Europe was invaded with the Normandy landings. And there was good progress in the Pacific. But the near Christmas time Battle of the Bulge showed that it wasn't over, and certainly our casualties were quite heavy that year. That was the year the GI Bill was passed, which made it possible for after the war many people to get educations that might not have been able before otherwise, and change the nature of our country. And the draft became very pressing, and fathers up to age 40 became drafted. I served with a guy named J.F. Diener, 40-year-old guy with 3 kids who had been drafted into the Navy. 45, in April, Okinawa was invaded. The severity of the fighting there was the basis for estimating that it cost us $1 billion for Japan. May, June surrendered. That summer we were preparing to invade Japan. Many of the troops who fought long and hard in Europe were not only thrilled by an opportunity to show their fighting prowess to Japan. Thanks to nuclear weapons, in August, and 3 Japanese cities, Japan surrendered in September. 46 was given over to picking up pieces and was still rationing and price control. The town, Millbrook, did a lot. I think there were 5 big themes that I picked out of the paper: service, news, and life, production, civil defense, rationing and shortages, and what I refer to as life goes on. They used to say people got engaged, people got married, babies were born, people died, people had accidents, crimes were committed. People bowled, hunted, fished, went to church, went to rituals. They went to the movies, they listened to the radio, they read newspapers. The service part of this, town sent sons and daughters off. At one point I counted about 300 names in this paper. Who remembers blue stars in the window in the night of the house? Yeah. There are quite a few such blue stars in the windows. If you look at the round table and the names there, as I said, it started off with a kind of short list of 40 and 41. I was kind of amused that as it started eating into the advertising side of the sheets, the round table had to go over to smaller type, like 43 and 44, and all the names in there. There were 2 excellent columns in advance against one another called service notes, as I recall. First by Giuseppe and then by Donna Safari, which pulled together really to read those notes, tell the story of the war, reflected in the letters that people serving the South America. First, the training camps, and then reporting in for arriving somewhere overseas. Then more mention of battles of Italy, Air War, Normandy, Pacific Islands. And as the war went on, more notes about people being wounded, missing, becoming POWs, to be well. Does anybody recall how the notices about casualties came? Or was anybody around for some of that? My recollection is that it was Western Union that delivered such bad news, and nobody who had somebody in service was particularly happy to see Western Union deliver the person on the doorstep. The town was very supportive. Put some sweaters off the people in the service.
All right. Question.
Yeah.
Did anyone in this room knit one of those sweaters that got sent down south to all of those boys in Florida and South Carolina? They obviously, I picture their sergeant say, all right, I hear some of you got gifts today. Raise your hands. And then he said, after whatever they called evening mess, I want you to sit down and write a letter home, because there must have been about 25 letters written back, beautiful letters talking about patriotism and how wonderful it was to have really marvelous letters. But all these young men wrote back, and I thought, Mama wasn't with them, but somebody told them.
Sergeant,
Write that thank you note.
The one I remember was from somebody in New Guinea who wrote back saying how much he appreciated the use of sweaters. Really, it was helpful, but it really wasn't too much needed in the jungles. There was quite a lot of emphasis on writing letters to people. Did anybody get that corresponding to people and say, yes, thank you. Does anybody remember V-mail?
Now, what exactly was V-mail?
A little flimsy, very light paper, no envelope. The letter was the envelope. And, the idea was to save weight on shipping all this mail.
Did anyone save letters from that? Do you have anyone with a treasure trove of letters that they saved? Bert did. Bert?
I have a stack of letters about that. That was sent to me and my brothers and my uncles from Aunt Madeline of every moment that happened over throughout each week. I think the whole history of love.
It would have saved me a lot of work.
For those who were from the area on news service, does anybody remember what it was like coming back from Millbrook on leave? I got the idea people were very supportive and canteen dances at St. Joe's.
I'd like to say something before that. I remember it must have been 42 when I was in school, and Mr. Schmidt was my social studies teacher. And either once or twice a week, he had on the blackboard, we had a big map of Europe. And we started in Africa, and then we went all the way through, and about every 2 weeks, that was in 40, I think in 42, 43, and up to 44. We traced it all the way up, and then people had different comments. Gee, I lost somebody here, and my uncle lost here. But we traced it right from Africa, and later on he left because we had so many different teachers that they didn't stay long before they went into the service. But we traced the whole thing right on up till I went in 45.
The Grange and the Red Cross were very diligent in making calls at Castle Point VA Hospital and over at the convalescent hospital in Portland, about which I knew nothing until I read the round table. Does anybody know anything about expeditions over there? Apparently a pretty big hospital. And I think this is probably the point where I would like to ask someone of the TOWNH sisters to tell us a little bit about Monsignor McCown, whose uniforms been lent us to put on display. Could you tell us a little bit about it?
I told you.
Could you stand up, Catherine, and tell the rest of the people here?
Well, he went after he left Melbourne.
As I understand it, he's been preaching in the area.
Let's see him account.
Services.
He went from downstairs. He went from downstairs.
Good, Catherine, could you or some of your sisters tell how you happened to get the uniform?
Well, we were very close friends. It was in the attic of our house. He left it there. Left it there. Because he couldn't take it to New York. He's got to take care of it.
So after he was discharged, he left his uniform at your home, and it's been up
Was
in the
put away,
attic?
right?
Yeah.
He was stationed in Melbourne for
Yeah.
years.
He was another parish.
Oh, he was pastor at St.
He
Joseph's?
was a pastor.
Oh.
Just for 12
Assistant.
years, I
For-
think, he
okay.
was in Melbourne.
And then he was drafted as a chaplain in the Army.
When Bert recognized, Bert was there with him and his brother Joe. They met in Europe, Joe and Father met Joe Church.
Pardon me?
Joe was with him at the Battle of the Bulge.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he found them there, they found each other. I have the picture of them, the two of them.
So Joe and the chaplain met at found one another at the Battle of the Bulge? Wow.
It was great. He was a very smart fellow. He took care of a lot of men.
Thank you.
Moving on to production, Millbrook was not the industrial center during the Second World War that it was during the Civil War. Does anyone happen to have had friends or themselves gone off to work in defense plants in Poughkeepsie or Hartford for years? Fair amount of that. Does anybody remember or know anything about magnesium mining over in Marseille?
Yes.
That was apparently a pretty bad, we saw, I don't think clip the ad, it was a big ad, but it was apparently a big operation.
Did you know someone who worked there?
One of my stepdads who worked there.
But,
He was called Jealous or something.
That was a dolomitic limestone. It was a high level, 20% magnesium in dolomitic limestone, and that's what they were extracting it from.
I worked in a defense factory because, I don't remember the name of it. It was like one summer, and I inspected shelves. It was awful. I put my hands in the oil and inspected shelves for cracks. And the day the war was over, the plant closed. We were out of job.
I assume it probably worked around the clock.
It's probably
But how'd you get in there? Did Poughkeepsie was this? Did the gas lynch or, how did?
I think I used to ride with someone. There were a couple of people who worked. It's a friend of mine. Her cousin was older and worked in Poughkeepsie, and we rode with him.
I remember collecting newspapers when we were kids, and we would. Anybody remember that railroad station down here in the green? And there was a railroad station, and we would all collect all kinds of newspapers and stack them up there. And I remember John Kading, he collected the most. And you know why he's in the business now. He knew he was going to go into newspapers for some reason.
One of the production things was producing quantity of a huge effort on war bonds, war stamps, and that's how we got the B-17, the recent Millbrook Roundtable. Town was able to, in fact, I don't think the town was able to buy a B-2 bomber, which goes for about $1 billion, but they was able to buy a B-17 back then. But Tom brought up the considerable effort that went into scrap drives, rounding up aluminum, fat. Betty Thirst asked me, why did we collect fat? My first answer was to make soap, but actually it also is used to make glycerin, which is a key component of explosives and ammunition. I think there's an ad in there about collecting milkweed pods for life preservers. Another big production was...
Another thing they collected, I can remember my mother, I grew up in Putnam County, but collecting rubber, like I remember rubber hoses and old rubber tires and tin cans. I could never figure out after the war ended, we stopped collecting tin cans, and now we're recycling them again. But you know, what happened in the meantime?
Actually, the rubber was really a big deal because the Japanese had overrun some of the main rubber production areas in the world. And at one point,
tin cans were big.
the restrictions on gasoline and on car use were driven as much by the shortage of rubber and the desire to conserve rubber as by the national shortage of gasoline. Another important production activity was bandages and blood, which was the province of the Red Cross, and they had quite substantial quotas that were expected to turn out. They had carried out blood drives, but also expected to turn out to thousands of bandages. Did anybody have any comments? Anybody they knew who was involved in that? It sounded like it was a lot of work.
We had an old schoolhouse that after, in Mahopac, when they built the centralized school, the little schoolhouses were, just used as community centers. And we had one in a little hamlet that I grew up in, Lake Secor. And once a week, my mother and a group of women would go up with the Red Cross, and they would make bandages, spend a day sewing bandages, and they'd be bundled up or something.
Given that the U.S. during the war had somewhere close to 1 million people wounded, it was a big demand for that. And blood drives. We've talked about sweaters. Does anybody know where the war relief depot was? There's apparently some place that accumulated relief supplies, but I don't know if it was the
The railroad station collected a lot of that.
And that was open at that point. That was closed at that point, but they used it for...
No, they used it, but that was still open.
Was it?
Yeah, I thought so. I think so.
One of the surprises I got in reading the yearbook, the high school yearbook, was that making model airplanes on order for the armed forces and observing corps was very substantial activity at the high school. I'd like John and Tom to tell us a little about that.
Well, back in 41, 42, we got a sketch, and we had to make Jack Hall. You made a bunch of
You made it in shop.
Yeah, we had a principal shop teacher with Mrs. Strickland, Mrs. Anderson Narrates. And we had these templates, and we had a piece of pine wood, and we had to carve it out according to that deal. I made 240s that day.
Balsam wood too, John.
Carve it out of the block of wood, and then, and then...
It was balsam wood too, John. Balsam wood too. Very light, that would make the wings. That would make the wings.
And then we painted it black, and it was done. Made another one, and another one.
Age of specialization.
It was great fun. We did a lot. Jack, I think you made a heck of a lot.
Well, they gave wax out after so long, so many in age.
They were all different American things.
Now, what was the purpose of that?
The purpose, number
Aircraft
one,
recognition?
Yes,
Yeah,
they were used in service classes, and they also, the air reserve was also used.
in that same vein, Tommy can tell you about our observation tower, because they were used to, as models for our planes, so we knew our planes against...
Yeah.
We'll come to that in a minute, so not get on wrong. I neglected towards the end of the production the really important activity in the area, which was food production, which was absolutely critical to the war effort and recovery after the war. Local farmers were thought to be so important that many of them received preferments in the draft. But farming was no easy job with fuel and machine shortages, labor shortages, and shortages of a lot of stuff. And Don Marshall was in that interesting situation, and I wonder if you'd like to tell us a little bit about what it was like trying to turn out food with all these shortages and limitations.
Thank you, Bill. I can go back a little bit. When I was on the basketball team, and just at the end of the basketball game, I got hit pretty hard and got knocked out. So I rode home with the coach that had a brand new car and had a radio in it. Now back then, cars were that big. And on the radio, they had the news like they do today, and they talked about the troubles they were having. And my coach said to me, he said, Don, he said, you know, we're going to have trouble with it. And December the 7th, that Sunday morning, we had trouble with it. So at that time, after school was out, I came back home, and I got a stepfather that was quite elderly. And they asked me to stay home with the farm. And back then, in 1941, we had 20 cows, and we milked a hen. And as Bill said, we didn't have machinery, we had horses. And we could get a little bit of gas to run some of the tractors to coincide all things like that. And we were fortunate because my sister was a nurse in National Hospital. And she was able to get the gas stamps to go back and forth if she wanted to. She lived in Pittsburgh, because she couldn't come back and forth. So we did have real fortunate to get out of the gas. We were talking about the air spotters, and the only thing that I've got left, I was an airplane spotter, and I had a little kid. And I was on that with a stepmother, and they had, I can't remember the hours, you were on for several hours, 6 to 9, and 9 to 12, and 12 to 3, and things like that. And, of course, you couldn't get gas, and you weren't supposed to drive. Of course, you had to drive there to be a spotter. And my stepbrother, there was one night about midnight, we started home, and he hadn't had any sleep, and he said, you know, if you can't sleep, you got to eat. And there was a bar in Pleasant Valley that was open. So we stopped at the bar to get something to eat. Of course, I said, you weren't supposed to be driving. And 3 days later, my stepfather's car, he got a notice from the sheriff department. And want to know why? His car was parked in front of the bar at 12 o'clock. He was really upset. I tell you, he was really upset. But their man that was ahead of that, I called him and told him about it. You really, if you were out riding around, you could get stopped. As we said, we did have horses. We didn't need a lot of gas. We milked cows. And Bill was talking about machinery, and of course then we used to pitch hay by hand. We had no dump rate. And I saw the machinery bill, and probably it was in 1943 or 1944. I asked the machinery bill, is there any chance of getting a side rate and a hay board? And that spring he came to the farm, and he had a side rate and a hay load in the back of the truck in pieces. And he said, do you want it? So we got to the office, and we spent that spring putting his hay load in and side rate. That's, there's very few. When they talked about tires, you couldn't buy a tire, you couldn't buy a tractor tire. There was some auto tires. I had a neighbor that had needed tires for his tractor because they would be gone. So he was able to, they gave him things so they could buy 2 tires for the front of his tractor. But they were automobile tires, they weren't tractor tires. And a new automobile tire with a tread, if you run it over the hay, they would pick up the hay, and it would be like a big ball. So he took the tires off his tractor, put them on his car, and took the old tires from his car that were from the shop, and put them on his tractor so he would see it. So it was, I was torn because my friends had done service and they asked me to stay home. I used to be in the Red Cross, and we talked about it. I used to give blood. And the ones that were home, you did all that you could. And another thing I just remembered that, of course, we're working out in the fields day every day. And probably a year before D-Day, we began to see a lot of airplanes fly. Some of you people. And we all wondered what was going on. Every day, you see these big planes going. And this is my recollection that I think probably they were building up the reserves in England for this big push. And then this went on for a year. England must have been full of it. And of course, this is the D-Day, and that's when they used it. And we're talking about scrap. All the railroads in the 30s were taking up the rails. And I understood that all the rails went to Japan, and they sent them all back. Thank you, we're not quite through with food production. I believe the phrase victory garden is known to some of you. Who got to work in the victory garden?
Oh, yeah.
We've got Ted Briggs' victory garden pictured there on the posters.
Can I tell a story about Ted Briggs?
Yeah.
I think Ted Briggs' victory garden was at his house. I don't think it was.
No. The other ones were up in Thorndale.
Strictly for the village residents.
Yeah.
He did get a prize, though. He was given a prize here in town. He and a friend of his, it may have been a me, and Ted told me this, that the prize was war stamps. So he and his friend had to go right to the bank, turn in war stamps. Cashier chastised them for even thinking of such a thing, but they went ahead and cashed in their war stamps, and I suppose ran out and bought an ice cream cone or something. Now there's an Anderson victory garden out there. Yeah, right.
I like to add something. On that victory garden, I was 11 years old, and Anthony Briggs, your dad, John Cole, about the garden, right? Right. Anthony Briggs, which is long deceased, let me buy a John Deere Model L tractor, and he had it used. And that year, I plowed 44 victory gardens at 11 years old. And it had a big handle, remember the handle? And every time I put the plow on, I had to go off the seat. I plowed 44 gardens.
That's wonderful.
Now, one thing I want to add while I'm standing, Don mentioned about tires. And during the war, re-grooving tires come out, if anybody remembers that. Re-grooving is when tires were wore out, and then they re-grooved. They had a tool. And that was the most dangerous thing they ever did, because when you re-groove, there were 4-ply tires, you ended up with 1-ply. And they were hot and It just made it so hot. It had so much friction, those tires, you catch fire.
I didn't plow many victory gardens, but my dad did.
That's right.
And we got a tractor River Briggs about the same time as what got Briggs there, Model L. And Mrs. Thorne had a piece of property up on the tribute gardens. And we had a piece of ground up there, and Dad plowed quite an acre up there. And then people from Millbrook, if they wanted, could go up and have their gardens and things there. But I remember Dad saying he started here in back at the church and went from here right to Sarntino's, which is at the top of the hill, but he plowed that whole thing here. Everybody had their victory garden in the back.
John, you were involved.
I go back to the victory garden when the Thorns first gave that property.
Yes.
That's where the Broken still stands today.
Yes, that's what
They went and did down the barn, put the door all on there, and I finally came home one day from the social club where they all meet and talk. We gotta get that close to victory garden plowed. So we got on one tractor, I got on the other, From that year on, it was going every year. But the smell of that manure really got everybody.
I think I had them all beat. I went through 2 victory gardens. The first World War and the second. The first World War garden was up on Maple Avenue, where we built our house in 1924. And I was only a little girl at that time. I won't tell you how old. But we used to walk from Alden Place to Maple Avenue to work in our garden. And we made out all right. My brother was going to high school at that time, my older brother, and he said to my mother, "Mom, someday we're going to build a house on this piece of land." And it came true. Mrs. Thorne and Mr. Diedrich were able to let us buy that piece of land, 2 plots to build a house on. And we moved in that house in 1924. The Second World War, I worked up at the Tribute Garden, and Mr. Bracciali, Mrs. Opie Thorne's gardener, would help us with our planting and with our taking care of the gardens. We planted everything that the Italians like to eat. And we just had a great time up there. Mrs. Thorne took care of everything. And it was just wonderful. This is where I learned how to garden. I'm still gardening today.
Had I known I would have you as my victory somewhere in the round table, I can't really vouch for the statistics, but there was a front page, quoting some other source, saying that roughly in the war, one of the years of the war, roughly 40% of the food in the United States is produced in victory gardens. It's really an amazing amount of production. I'm going to move on to...
Bill, could I just add something? Besides, the victory gardens, the vegetables, it was very difficult to get meat. We had the books, and my sister and I had a dollhouse. It was a little log cabin, and my mother decided that it might be a good idea to get some baby chicks. And so our dollhouse was converted into a chicken house. And we had the little cute little fuzzy baby chicks, and we put them out, and then when my sister and I would come home from school in the evening, in the wintertime, we'd have to go out and put a lantern in the chicken coop to keep a couple of lanterns to keep the chickens warm and collect the eggs. And then, of course, came the time to butcher the chickens. And my mother had a neighbor come and cut the chicken's head off, and it killed her to pluck the chicken, but she did, and I can remember doing it in our kitchen, and she had the 2, the tubs that you'd wash clothes in, and the warm water, and pick them, and then she roasted the chicken, my sister and I, and we could not eat that chicken. We had seen them since they were little yellow fluffy things, and no way could we eat those chickens, so...
You haven't had chicken since, have you?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, have you?
Not that I've raised, not that I've fed.
We had the dress shop on Franklin Avenue, and when Charlotte bought the dress shop, it was a boarding house, and we converted it into the dress shop. And behind the boarding house, they had stables with an upstairs loft, and Charlotte kept that up for a while. And then the war came, and she decided she was going to have baby chicks. So she got 75 little baby chicks, and she was going to go down the shop every day. She worked, went in, took care of the baby chicks. One morning she came in, she had a little kerosene burner to keep them warm. She came in one morning, she didn't hear the baby chicks. They always went chick, chick, chick. And she went upstairs, and here they were. They were little black and white chickens with their heads down. And the kerosene stove went up, and they suffocated. But there were a few going around trying to live. So the Dr. Mackenzie and his boys lived across the way. And she called the two devils, Gordon and John Mackenzie, to come over. The chickens were dying. Come and help me. So they ran back to their father and said, the chickens are dying. We got to do something about it. So he gave them chloroform. So they came over and they chloroformed the few that were left. And that was the end of the chickens.
I'd like the record to show that the moderator has no intention of trying to top that. Moving on to what I call civil defense, it was clear from the paper that there was a lot of early planning concerned about possible attacks on the United States. Common one was the advice to clear out your attic, because that's where incendiary bombs fell down. I don't know if anybody cleaned out their attic because of that, but it's a generally good idea. There was planning to receive refugees from New York City, which was probably a federal target, no problem. And people signed up station wagons for possible use as ambulances. When the war arrived, there was a civil defense organization with wardens, auxiliary police, and firemen, first aid workers, and we've been given some memorabilia about those activities. There were blackouts and announced drills and unannounced drills, and a lot of people pitched in on that. I think the American Legion helped that as well. But one of the keynote activities, and I hadn't known about Don's involvement with the air auxiliaries, there was a post which Ginny and I had been trying to figure out where I was located, but I think Tom Cardinal can tell us about the aerial observation business and where it was.
What I remember about that was I was born in 28, so that would make me around 13 years old, in the early 40s. And I remember it would be somewhere near where the canyon is up in the tribute garden in the back of Thorndale. At the highest point, someone had built a shack, 10 by 10 or 12 by 12, with the windows like this, and there was an old, I recall, there was an old stove in there. But we used to, and then on the walls they had all these pictures like we have here of all these silhouettes of these different planes, and you had to identify them, you had to know them, and we didn't score too well in Milbert, but this was, we shot down our own enemy, our own planes a couple times. But we used to go there, and we had a telephone in there, and as I recall, if you spotted the plane, you would, if they was going from south to north, you would just call Rhinebeck and say, Rhinebeck, or whatever the number was, you'd call it and say, there's a twin engine plane, or there's 10 planes, or 5 planes, and coming your way, so make sure you pick it up, and it would go on that way. I think that's the way that it worked all around. But this magazine here was given by Irving McCandless. You remember Irving McCandless? Mm-hmm. And his son, Gordy. I had mentioned it to him that I was going to come over here and talk about a little bit about the thing. And so he got this, and he would like to donate it to the, if you put Irving's name on it, a gift of. And here's some, this was a great thing. Here is some of these towns and villages that won 100% achievement on this, what they call the review of the aircraft recognition. Do you know what plane it was or whatever? And I noticed that here, Walsall was a winner. And the further here, on the 500% one, Armenia won. But Millbrook just got honorable mention. I say we shot more of ours down than we did at the enemy.
Was President Alley in there?
Huh?
Was President Alley in that meeting?
It could be. I didn't know it's all of them. No, I looked at it. But this is back, that's the magazine, 1944. But we used to go up there as kids. We used to, you know, we just go up there just to play.
Some of it
Tom?
got started,
I'm sorry. Did you use binoculars to identify, or just your eyes?
No, we had, what we looked up in the air, they weren't
Yeah.
that high, but we did have binoculars.
Yeah.
I think it was only one pair, but we used to have to try to guess what, you know, as close as you could say, was it twin engine or a double wing or whatever it was. But we used to go up there and enjoy it.
Didn't they have something down at the fall where you went up there and was watching the planes and that too? Because I think this factory from Nova went down that
Yes, I do remember that.
location too.
And then we also had what we call, he was talking about a civil defense, which was where they, that was held down at Paul J. Haight's, there was an office, a big office down in Paul J. Haight's, there was a lot of phones down there. And that was also when I can remember as a kid when the fire whistle would go on at night. You said we were safe, we were the safest town. Well, you tell a 12 and 13-year-old when that whistle would go on, everybody had to get off the streets, like you said. You couldn't get on the street then. You could get it. Mr. Milroy, the policeman, would take you right into the little jail we had. So you had to escape and get out of there. But when we were kids, we used to run from one backyard to another, you know, and see if they would catch us. And they actually had sticks, you know, what do you call it, like a policeman. And if you got caught there, boy, you had to get off. But when like one whistle would blow, that meant everybody off the street. And then if two fire whistles would go, that meant take all the lights out. You had to close your. I remember closing the. And we were afraid because you know they're gonna come over here and bomb us. But it was a lot of fun. We had a good time. But that book you'll enjoy reading that book. That's what I remember.
He formed them and they used to walk around the live here training. They did about the same as they used to come up there and stop. They had an old abandoned Paul J. Haig office with the music. And they had armbands that I made for them.
Yes,
I gave them the miners' caps.
Yeah, we had miners' caps. Paul Haig donated those.
Right. My brother used to toe out when he walked. And he would march them down the Whitefield, and Louis Marone would imitate and get behind him.
Are you talking Billy Gifford?
Yeah.
Sure, he would reach from Captain Bill Gifford. You're right. I'll tell you a story about it. We were in a home guard, and if you took a look at us, how the hell we're going to protect those? Anybody remember Mr. Davidson?
Yes.
Davidson Road, a wealthy man, or he had some farm or whatever he did. But he had, yes, he donated to Mr. Captain Gifford. He donated World War I bayonets. There must have been 30, 40 bayonets. And if you were privileged to kill it. And our job was to get a stick. You had to get a stick about the size, maybe the length of a rifle. And we fix it off. And here we had the armband, we had the hat, and all we liked was a swastika, that's all. And we would march in the back of the, like you said, back of the YMCA. And Billy had a habit of, he walked like, if you remember, he wasn't too well coordinated, God bless. He had feet that were like this. He was backing up as we were marching. He tripped out and he couldn't remember how to tell us that, you know, wait a minute, you got it. We didn't know, you got to have the right word, but we kept going. Joe Spagnuolo would walk right over. We kept marching down with those sticks. We had to go and protect Milbrook. Can you imagine? That was something I really remember that. I forgot about it. You're called the Milford Home Guard.
I feel compelled to observe at this point, as moderator, that clearly the Millbrook Roundtable did not capture all what went on around here.
No, there's a lot of...
And by the way, on a sort of more serious technical note, in 43 and 44, the risk of the U.S. being bombed is pretty small, but there wasn't radar coverage with air traffic control in the United States, so it was very useful to the armed forces to have these reports of who was flying where, keep track of a considerable amount of data. We'll be happy to know that the last topic is the not so sure rationing and shortages. Raising price control, rubber tire problems, oil, gas, speed limits of 40 miles an hour in New York State. Civilian production stopped, and my sense, reading the paper, was for about 44, the enthusiasm and novelty had worn off and it had gotten to be a bit of a drag. Is that a correct assessment of how it seemed to be in the paper? There was food rationing, clothing rationing, couldn't get nylons and you could know that silk. Really total war came when the roundtable could no longer take new subscriptions because there wasn't enough paper. And the rationing system sounded very complex with different colored markers and point values for various things. And I remember reading the newspaper explanation of it all, and surely the bottom line was there would be people available at the store to explain all of this, which probably just the right. Who remembers the rationing business? Was it as complicated as it sounded to me?
Because that's when I had started drinking hot coffee. And people would come in and want different things from the restaurants and that, the shortage of sugar and that. I want it, don't care, shortage or not, I want the sugar. And we had to put up with quite a bit of sarcasm for different ones, regardless of the war.
Well, we were very fortunate being on the farm because we had the milk, we had chickens, we had eggs, and we had a garden. I don't remember really during the Depression. I really don't remember being deprived of good meals.
That's right.
Well, not everything was
You're on
rationed.
the farm.
So I don't think anybody here is probably difficult.
I can go back to the early year of 42, when my dad, we lived on the Opie Thorn estate. We got 2 quarts of milk between the 3 of us children. My father went to Opie Thorn and said, Mrs. Thorn, instead of you giving us the 2 quarts of milk that you throw into, can we go out and buy a cow? My father bought a cow. Well, by golly, the best thing we ever did. We all learned how to milk that cow.
You end up with 4 quarts.
Well, today, as my father says, we've got to have butter on our bread. We've got to have homemade buttermilk.
Yeah.
Buttermilk. We made cottage cheese. We made, you name it. My mother made anything and everything that we could make.
Smart move, your
Now, that
father.
wasn't enough. My father says, well, we've got to take it, and we need another garden. So we planted must have been a couple hundred cabbage beds. So we made 3 barrels of sauerkraut and killed a couple of pigs. And we had pig knuckles and sauerkraut.
See that?
But anyway, that was how we got around that whole thing. We got 5 of
impressed me. One was the optimism of the rationing system, that people would declare the canned goods they already have in their homes, and telling them that if they did, they didn't need to worry, everybody would share equally.
Yes, it was in a plastic bag. Someone, Jack, are you going to add to that?
Well, this is a little off of that, but my father was a butcher. And during the war, with these different estates and farms and stuff like that, we went all over. And when Charlie Tripp had his beef market here in Newark at that time, he used to go down to Big Davis during the war and twice a week butcher a lamb. But the most thing I remember, he had his barrels and stuff, and he'd go all over to these different farms and stuff like that, butchering pigs and, as I say, steers and things of that nature. And he got the head and the hide for butchering. And we ate pretty good.
We raised a lot of chickens and ham.
One of the things that impressed me was the Ration Board published their decisions in the roundtable for the world to see. I thought that was a good example of open government. It showed so-and-so was getting 2 into 2, and somebody else was getting a tractor fire, things like that. Edna, is your voice such that you could tell us a little bit about trying to run a newspaper when the paper wasn't around and they took the printer?
Only we could print only the things that were fit to print. Well, I remember those days as I wasn't so terribly involved in one sense because I had a new baby born in middle 1941. But our men, we had 2 very good men in the print shop. You know them, I'm sure, Phil Shara and Dominic Ford. And my husband was grooming Phil Shara to be the head of the shop. And of course, both of them left. And we had Bill Russell, who was the linotype man, and he and John had to carry on, and the women, when I couldn't leave the baby, and the 2 women who had worked as secretaries, Doris Safari and
Seppi.
Jenny, was it Jenny? What was the other one?
Was it a Seppi girl? No. Was there a Seppi girl there working?
Oh, I can't remember it. Anyway, they did all sorts of things. In fact, they started Red Collins, so it was my job to edit and proofread everything. And many a time, getting out the paper took a longer time than it would ordinarily. Many a time we came in to go to bed when the sun was getting up in the morning. And let's see, I spent a lot of time writing to the boys in service, and my husband was going a lot up there. I guess the tower watching.
Yeah. How did you
but he went
distribute
at
it?
night.
How did you distribute the
What?
papers back then? How did you distribute them? Did you give them to kids that would take them around?
Down at the corner, down at Quaig's it was then, the Quaig's store.
Okay.
They took them down and people.
You went to the store to buy it?
Yes. But then, as Bill said, we had to limit the production because we couldn't get the paper, and we couldn't take any more subscriptions unless someone had given up one. But it was strange. It didn't seem like a time of deprivation. We also had a big victory garden, but we had a piece of property up on Chestnut Ridge, and we had another couple had a huge garden up there. And when gas was restricted, we'd go up there maybe twice a week to work the garden. 4 of us working in the garden. We did pretty well with the food. And what was the other thing I was going to tell you? If you've heard of senior moments. But the thing that impressed me, I think I had lived through the Depression the decade before,
So I guess maybe I didn't feel some of the loss. And then I think a lot of people just practice the Yankee system of, use it up, wear it out, make it do it out. And it's amazing how well you can get along that way too. We don't think so now, but we did then. And the thing that I remember most, I think, is that the cooperation of people here in Millbrook. Everybody was so careful and watchful of everybody else. And if there was a job to be done, and you asked somebody to do something, they would do it. They wouldn't say, "That's not my job," as they might say today. It was really wonderful. I guess maybe it takes adversity sometimes to bring out the very best in people. So Millbrook was not a bad place to be during the war, but we did worry about our boys that were gone, and that was our main concern. I can remember changing the addresses in the paper as fast as they would change, and people would rush to get the paper to see if there were new addresses for the boys. And still, I looked at the map in there and said, isn't it dreadful? Still the fighting among people goes on.
She touched on something that didn't make a big thing about it, talking tonight. The war, 12 million people lost in forces, mostly men. There were quite a few women from the town that served in the armed forces. But in addition, of course, the war put an enormous number of women in the workforce, factories, and filling in for everything. The country would not have run the way without the leaders. I'm kind of run down. I would like you to think about what you remember that you'd like to tell us about it, and particularly how it felt as the war went on and on and on.
First thing it taught us, names of places you thought you would never hear of before.
Apply geography. Yes.
That reminds me, back then I was only 10, 11 years old. My father was would work at the water tower as a guard at night.
Air raids.
Yeah, during air raids or whatever. And I always wondered why. Why would Hitler want to bomb Millbrook? All the United States, why would he want to bomb Millbrook? Because I was too young to really understand. But that is something I always wondered about.
Because he missed New York City.
You gotta remember, there are an awful lot of Italians living in You took a good bomb there, that's a lot of it. We used to have a game we would play. How many slogans can you remember? And we used to try to go to 10 and 12. I only know of 2 now. You probably know a lot more. He who relaxes helps the axis, right? A slip of the lip will sink a...
It was ships.
Keep going. Who can go another one? Can you go? That's it? You mean that's the 2?
I want you. I want you.
That's a good one.
There was something about saving bonds too, and I forget how it went. It was about
A lot
saving
more.
bonds.
You might die, you must know them. No, that's it.
Nancy knows something.
Yeah.
No, I was laughing listening tonight because, of course, I didn't grow up here. I grew up in northern New York, but I was around there. But in a little town, West Carthage, it's about the same size as Millbrook. My mother watched for planes, and my father was a civil defense warden, all the same kind of thing. But when you were talking about the deferments, my dad worked at a paper manufacturing plant in Brownsville. And they had applied for a deferment for it, and they said you could not go, that's all there was to it. So the day came, you were supposed to report to the draft board, and they said, well, you can't go. And he said, you don't have the deferment, in your hand, I have to go. So he started out to the draft board in Watertown, and as soon as he left, the mail came, and his deferment was in it. And they chased him all the way to Watertown, trying to make sure they could get him before, he got before the draft board. So I was very lucky he was home. But I know there were times also when he felt funny about being deferred to, being home when most of them were there. It's also very close to what was Pine Camp and is now Fort Drum. And they did have German war prisoners there. We could not cut across Pine Camp like we used to. Had to stay off.
She mentioned German war prisoners. How many people here realize that Greenhaven prison in Stormville had several thousand German POWs here? When I was in the Air Force in Europe in 1952 to 55, I worked in an office with several Germans. 2 of them were alumni of Greenhaven.
Oh, gee.
When the war was over, they did not want to go back to Germany.
I'm aware of some Africa Corps veterans who were prisoners in the United States put to work on a farm in Kansas. And in the 60s, they had an alumni association came back to visit on the farm that they used to work on. I think the real triumph of wars is when you overcome your enemies with affection. Or, you must have been in service longer than anybody else.
Quite a while. I went in May 9, May 9th, 1941, drafted, and was out in 46. So we went through quite a lot of the kind of work.
I think one of there are a couple of things I didn't touch on from the newspaper. Obviously, many of the people in town had their origins from Italy. And I think, did you get back there?
Yes, and I met some of my relatives there. Yeah. We were going through the town of Lafayette at one point, and we stopped along the highway, and we talked to this woman, and we asked her different questions and so on. And we asked her name. She said, "My name is Gillespie."
I remember playing poker against her I think she had the good luck to serve with 4 good friends from Millbrook in the same unit through the whole war, and they made it out together in one piece.
Just one story I have to tell about rationing. Sugar was very scarce, I understand. Nobody could get sugar. Here about 20 years ago, I was going through my attic at home, and I found 5-pound bag of sugar. God bless Jim Dunn.
That can't be your name.
Bill, a little thing here happening, one voice was sent back to me from Australia.
Amazing. Gee, that's a
Wow.
would caution you not to throw it.
That's a museum. Back in the 1940s, and really Aborigines were,
Sally, did you want to say something? You had.
Oh, my mother, we could go to the village twice a day. We weren't allowed to trips. So sometimes we'd stay for the movies, and Mother would drive in and she'd hide up by the Catholic Church and hope Mr. Cunningham would find her. And he always found her.
Did they really keep track of you?
What? Did they keep track of? Oh, we had to walk down there. Oh, yes. She was afraid they would. But I also have a friend who was a Nazi, and he was in the 2-man subs. And Bill said to him, when did you know it was over? And he said, when the sky was nothing but planes day and night. And he said he was only 18, and his father didn't approve of Hitler. And he said he thought it was kind of exciting. He was too young.
This talk about food and ration and everything, I read an article about it a few years back. I don't know where that magazine went. Over in England is responsible, mainly for feeding troops. If I leave early, make sure it gets he watched his budget, and he wanted to save and have a real big final meal for celebration. So he did. And after they had the meal, he walked around casually asking how they liked the meals. And he had caviar, which was kind of a scarce item. And one English fellow said, the meal was pretty good, he said, but the strawberry jam tastes a little fishy.
I think there was another thing probably Sally knows about. Weren't there some girls that came from England? This is Congress. Two of them were Miss Whitney, two were Miss Palmer, and two of them were Mrs. TOWNH.
Yeah, I remember that. Robert Jack, Mrs. Boomer had, he was in my class at school, and she took some of the children from England.
Well, there was Miss Lamont took the two stands people. Shirley Stanley.
Mrs. Donnelly.
Miss Donnelly. Shirley Stanley and I think.
Miss Lamont had Jack.
Miss Lamont had Robert Jack, you're right.
And then there's another one too, another pardon?
Mrs. Boomer had the Nelsons. James and Margaret. James said something out of the house, and Margaret was so
I think we've made the point that Millburn was very much in the middle of the Second World War. Perhaps if Hitler had known how much he contributed, he would have been higher on his target list. I thank you for the memorabilia, which you will take your own back tonight, if you will. See that everybody gets this back. And thank you very much for coming.
I would just like to add something, if I may. I'm trying to think of the actress that is, she was on television, and she used to write murder mysteries. Angela Lansbury, thank you. Angela Lansbury, talking about people that came from England. I grew up in Mahopac, and there was a family in Mahopac that knew the Lansburys, I guess, from England. And Angela and Mrs. Lansbury, and Angela had twin brothers, Bruce and Edgar. And they came from England, and they lived in Mahopac for a number of years, and Bruce and Edgar were in my sister's class. And I think now, I see her on television. I remember her walking down, Mahopac wasn't even as big as Millbrook, and see her walking down the street, and they were from England with their very British accents at that time, and they were here as refugees from the war. And their father was in the military in England. They were sent over here for safety.
Well, I thank you all for pitching in tonight. It proves that collectively we can remember a lot more than any one individual does. And kind of fun.
Anything to add to that, except I found it a wonderful, very interesting. If you'd like to look at anything out there, some things came in kind of late. Charlie, you brought in some civil defense things, which some of you may have seen. I didn't notice it. Nancy Spagnola, you here? Has a wonderful pin. Did your mother earn?
Oh, the $500 pin. Yep.
$500 pin for being an observer.
And there's a picture of the